I'm going to introduce our next presenter. He's coming in from Seattle, Washington, where he's a senior web developer working on web performance at Etsy. I'm not sure if he has any certifications like RUM, but his fun fact is that he has tried over 8,000 beers, ciders, and meads. Tonight, though, he's going to be talking about distilling rum. So please put your double box together for David Ross.
Hello. So today I'm going to talk about an experience I've had multiple times in my web performance career, and I think one that might resonate with a good deal of the crowd, which is taking your metrics and sending them upwards to management. It's a common challenge. It's great, though, because they're interested in what you have to say, and they want to know if web performance is improving, but it also comes with some issues. In my experience, at a certain level, meetings run on slides and slide decks, but dashboards don't really fit the format too well. Live demos, we know the challenges there. Something always manages to go wrong. There's a network issue. There's a permissions issue. Oh, hey, I need to re-authenticate. Or the dreaded, oh, hey, can you click on that filter and see what this looks like instead? But on the other hand, static content gets out of sync, sometimes remarkably quickly, and it can get out of hands. I don't know how many times I've had my data get copied into a slide deck, that gets copied into another slide deck, that gets copied into a third slide deck, and then my data is getting shared to an audience I'm not entirely sure of, and I don't know how out of date that is. And with that, that makes it difficult to provide the appropriate level of detail as the audience changes. If it's the right amount of detail to engineering managers, by the time it hits the C-suite, that may be boring them to death. And, well, you can't always be there for context for story. As great as it would be to be invited to every single meeting your slide shows up in, that doesn't always happen. So instead, I suggest embracing the format by using data connectors. In this case, I'm using CrUX via BigQuery into Google Sheets, into Google Slides, but a lot of this should apply to whatever your preferred data pipeline is. It matches the data to the slide format. By using a controlled view that you built up, it removes this live risk because nothing is being updated out from under you and nothing can be updated out from under you. The content gets synced to your data and linked to your deck, and that way, if someone copies my slide into a new deck, they are copying the data linkage, and that means when I update my data, every single slide deck that is attached to it also gets that update. By focusing this detail in from the start, it reduces the drift because there's nothing that can be paired out without your control. And by syndicating the context to the data, it can help when you're not there. It can't do everything, but it's the best we've got. Step 0, before I get into the nitty-gritty, we've got to talk about how you source your RUM, because that is a really important decision that may be getting made for you. You need to know where you're getting your RUM from, and you need to know the limitations before it reaches you. If you're looking at Chrome-only data, perhaps because one of the metrics that you really want to talk about is only available in Chrome, then you may be reaching a 50% loss. This is a generic look from RUM archive to get a picture that's not just CrUX, where if you stick to Chrome only, you're losing half your data. Depends on your site, but it's probably going to be somewhat similar. Is the data being pre-summarized, or are you taking a total count and distilling it down yourself? Both have advantages, both have challenges in how your data is processed. Also, what's your sample rate? Are you looking at 1% of traffic? 10%? Are you getting the fire hose of absolutely everything? Also, bot filtering. Is your data being filtered for bots before or after? I've seen some experiments show significant data skew because one bot wave came in on one particular browser profile, and that skewed the performance metrics. So ultimately, RUM is plentiful, but it needs distillation. CrUX does, however, have a very handy advantage, which is because it's publicly accessible data, it provides competitor analysis. And once you start working up the reporting tree, competitor analysis becomes really relevant. People want to know who they're competing against and how much better you are or not against them. So real quickly, what's the structure of the connector? I found that 4 pages works really well on this slide. First off, a settings page. Here we can see a few settings that get connected into the query to modify the query without having to go in and actually change it. This is really nice because this means that if someone else needs to go in and update it for you because you're out on vacation, they're not running the risk of modifying that SQL query and potentially breaking something in a way that you won't find out until months later. Google Sheets and spreadsheets in general are great for many things. Testability is not one of them. Next, you need a BigQuery preview connection. This is required, and this is where the data gets pulled in. Third, you need a extract page. This reduces the amount of times that you're requerying the database, and that can save a lot of money. I'll get into that a little bit more later. And lastly, you need a presentation layer. This is where all of the data and all the transformations you make get condensed down into the view that goes into the slide deck. Real quickly, since the tutorial covers it much more thoroughly, setting up CrUX to Sheets connector. You need to set up or attach a Google Cloud project. Mind the billing when querying the data. This can be really important. In Sheets, data connectors connect to BigQuery, point it to your project, write a custom query, and you're off to the races. But what does this query look like? So building the query, you're going to spend a lot of time in this query editor page. And this is an example of a summary. I'm going to break it down a little bit, but there's also links at the end to each of the source code for this. So don't worry if you're not catching it right away. Some notes just on general effectiveness now. Test in BigQuery console. It's much more responsive and much quicker when you're making changes. So you can test with quicker uptime than waiting for the Sheets connector to reload each time. Also, limit your data to 1 month when testing. You might want a larger window when you're actually running the final report, but less data run in testing is more money saved. Also, BigQuery console also exports into Google Sheets, which means that once you set up a query, you can create a one-off export, build the rest of your page, and then come back and link it together at the end. So real quickly looking at the query itself, this is somewhat familiar if you've spent any time working with SQL. From the Chrome UX report device summary, where origin at domain. The at here is neat because this is a parameter. This is what I described earlier, where that variable is then linked to a cell on your settings page. And then when the query is run, it automatically updates the domain. It automatically updates the month before and the query month without having to touch the query itself. One thing with it, though, mind the data types. You don't want to be passing in what you think is an integer, but then then BigQuery thinks it's a string, and then the whole thing falls apart. Also, using between saves a significant amount of lookup costs. It allows the query optimizer to throw out subtables that are entirely unneeded. And if you're not querying them, you're not being charged for them. And this works much more effectively than doing a integer-based comparison. Also, always set the order by to make linking cells easier. It may seem redundant to have order by device descending, year, month descending, but it's going to save you time and frustration later on if the order changes because you were relying on an implicit order. Explicit select also reduces data and cost. This is much more effective than just doing select star, much cheaper, much faster, and that way it's not going to change out from under you. String as device lets us split out this query to be both the total for the entire site and then also mobile. Or if you prefer, if you want to combine tablet and mobile, this can also be used for that as well. And then just union all it together to deliver both the total and mobile in one fetch. That way, instead of 6 different queries running in parallel, you can get it down to 3 or 4. So cool, we get the green light, query is valid. We're going to process 163 gigabytes of data, and we're off to the races. What does that look like? This is the preview page. It's pretty short because we're only looking at 2 months total and mobile, but you can also see function and filtering and extract, and you may think, cool, I can just use these. Hold off. If you change the filters here, it reruns the database query every single time, and that's really expensive really quickly as well. Instead, use the extract function to just extract the data off onto a new sheet. That way you can do all the data processing you want on that read-only version of the data export, and you can also do more data processing than you would otherwise be able to do. And the way it adds up is that with BigQuery, it's $6.25 US dollars per terabyte. You get 1 terabyte for free each month. So if you run these queries as I have them set up, you can stay under the free limit just barely. You can also set it up to refresh manually or automatically. I prefer manually because I do like the human in the loop value of having someone look at the data and see what changed and try to provide the explanation for what changed. But if automatic's what works for you, you have the option. And this is the extracted result. We have conditional formatting for color coding. The query this and last month order is already applied. And each of these entries links into the slide deck. So the data and the page formatting is automatically synced into your slide. Cool. But we're not done yet. Now quickly, histogram query to cover the rest of it. We're still using parameter, form not equal desktop to merge tablet and phone like I described. In this case, we're using the CrUX report experimental table because that allows us to use partitioning and clustering automatically, and that also reduces cost further, using unnest to unfold LCP data. Clamping values with case or if is also something I recommend. Clamping everything below, say, 700 milliseconds on LCP or above 4.5 seconds. It makes the long tail data easier to use. It makes the cell map much easier on you. And it helps reinforce the story of your data. If someone's having experience over 4.5 seconds for LCP, they're not having a great time. And by the time you're sending this upwards to management, the nuances of 4.5 seconds versus 5 seconds, probably not as helpful. Use sum to combine stack percentages. Round, do this if at the outset it makes later display much easier than introducing it at a later step. It'll save you a lot of time that way and a lot of why is this number not adding up. And in total, cool, we have a result for generating a complete histogram of your data. So what does that look like? Here we see the clamping, which makes the color coding really easy. We can have the green, yellow, red of good, moderate, poor, consistent, and regular, and matched to the thresholds. And by exporting this as a linked object in Google Slides, the changes stay synced to that slide deck. So putting it together, here we have the complete presentation page where you see a dashboard that gives you at a glance what your site looks like. But that's still more than you want to be sending around on its own. So instead, we take each of these subsections, attach the linked table and linked chart like I described, and on the right, we get the final product, which is one single cell, one single card that provides at a glance how you're doing for Core Web Vitals for one given metric. So putting it all together, this is the product. This is my alternative, and this slide deck itself is actually linked into the CrUX report and is connected directly into BigQuery, so that way each month, as the CrUX report updates, this slide can and will update. And here we see total and mobile, LCP, CLS, and I just skipped ahead to INP rather than FID, much more useful. And this is live. This is copyable. If you take this link and then copy it into your own slide deck, it'll give you the results for Etsy, unless you change the domain. So this is my better alternative. Bringing it back to why we're trying to embrace the format, we see how the data connectors allow the data to go from SQL and BigQuery directly into slides. We have a controlled view, so nothing is updating without us knowing it. The content is synced and updated, so that way every time somebody copies that slide, they get all of the data updates as well. The data is focused down, so there's no more data than you need, and there's not much room for it to drift, and we get a little bit of context. The note up here about largest contentful paint as a key driver for improving conversion. It goes alongside. So here's a link to the queries that I've generated, the demo connector sheet that you should be able to regenerate, and this slide deck itself in case you want to build this for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And my fun fact is that I'm a spreadsheet nerd, so that was really awesome.